Usually in my reviews, I try to avoid spoilers as much as I can, and I'm still going to try to do so here, but there's a lot that I want to cover. So consider yourself warned. In an effort to be as spoiler-free as possible, here's the shortened version. It's a game where you deliver packages across a somewhat open world. You gotta stealth around invisible enemies and fight isolated tribesmen in tents who throw spears. God, I wish I was making that up. The controls are bad, everything tries to get in your way, the game goes at a snail's pace, and overall, the whole thing is just terrible. That's your spoiler-free review. We're moving forward. The story is in a near-future planet Earth where some kind of apocalypse has taken place, causing two separate phenomena to occur frequently from then on. The first being a special type of rain known as timefall that rapidly accelerates the age of anything it touches. And the second is that invisible ghosts now roam the Earth seeking living things to drag to hell, or to swallow whole and cause gigantic explosions. Needless to say, this makes the outside world a pretty dangerous place to live in. As such, much of humanity has been isolated from each other, which is where Amelie comes in. She travels from one side of the country to the other, laying down a cable to a massive internet connection, known as the chiral network. Upon completing her journey, Amelie is kidnapped by terrorists on the West Coast, and Sam Porter Bridges, an experienced delivery man, is recruited to now connect those laid out points of the chiral network and eventually make his way to the West Coast, where somehow he has to figure out how to rescue Amelie from armed terrorists. That's about the gist of it. There's also lots of lore, like test tube babies being used to detect ghosts, and everyone having a personal version of what's known as a beach, which seems to be both purgatory and an alternate dimension that can be traveled to for those who have the power to do so. Sam is also later revealed to be some sort of chosen one. For starters, he's what's known as a repatriate, which means he has the Dark Souls curse and just comes back to life after dying. His bodily fluids are also harmful to the ghost, which makes his blood a very potent weapon. The acting is pretty damn good. No one in particular does a bad job, although most of the better scenes don't start happening until very late in the game, particularly around the time when Hartman gets properly introduced and Deadman and Die Hard Man get more proper screen time. Norman Reedus, who has the main lead, does an okay job, not too big of a deal, but definitely enjoyable. The same can be said for the actresses who play Fragile and Mama. Nothing really stands out as much as the game tries to, but they do have good performances. Mads Mikkelsen is a really interesting case in particular. He commands such an intimidating yet understated presence as one of the game's villains, while the scenes about his backstory showcase some pretty good depth to his acting abilities. Troy Baker is pretty good too. He's super over the top, which is a good contrast to the game's more somber tone, although he does come off less as villainous and more so as goofy. He also loves to mention video game cliches for some reason, like hitting the reset button or saying you're running out of continues. Acting is good and the scene direction is well done too, although this takes a long time to get going. The early game is a massive exposition dump, and even then there are still a few scenes that feature stale rooms with static characters talking to each other, but it does get better and more interesting later on. As for the story, that's one of my biggest complaints. If they at least nailed this aspect, then maybe the game wouldn't be so bad. But no, it's garbage. Much of it is layers upon layers upon layers, and enough red herrings to fill a fish market. There's talk of hopping between dimensions, time travel, learning from the past to predict the future, and I don't just mean learning from past mistakes, I'm talking about studying ancient fossils to find out what happened millions of years ago is happening now. That sort of thing. You gotta make sacrifices for the greater good, but you gotta live for yourself. It's the bonds that make us stronger, but you can't trust anybody. Just dude, pick a single theme and figure out what the hell you're trying to say. There are so many plot points and nothing ever goes anywhere. The overall main theme that I can gather is how humanity is on a path to self-destruction, which is something Kojima loves to do, what with nuclear warfare being a big part of his Metal Gear series. But instead of nukes, Dude, it's whales beaching themselves. Whoa, that's deep. In order to preserve the human race, we need to come together and take care of each other, which is why Sam learns to love his test tube baby while everyone else treats it like a tool. Sam is the example we're supposed to follow. That's great and all, but then there's this thing revealed very late in the game about something called an extinction entity, which is apparently a natural phenomenon, or maybe it's an eldritch lord. I don't know. Whatever it is, it causes the world to end. I can't tell if the coming of the extinction entity was unavoidable, or if it was all caused by a plot important character who had a near-death experience, or what the hell is going on. But the point is that people didn't isolate themselves on purpose or out of fear for each other or through selfishness. They did it because there are friggin' ghosts and there's acid rain all the time. And if test tube babies help me survive all that, then so be it. You can't make me feel bad for the baby when I'm put in situations that force me to use the baby. And I'm not saying the baby's a bad character, they did really good for someone with no lines of dialogue.
And this is why I hate these things.
I'm just saying that there are so many different plot threads and themes that go nowhere, at best, and at worst, they contradict and go against each other. It's stupid. The story is stupid. It's slow to start and it has a payoff that I'm actually glad is infuriating. Otherwise, I would pass out from how boring it is. Somehow, and I don't know how they pulled this one off, but somehow, the gameplay is even worse than the story. As I'm sure you've all heard by now, but likely finds it hard to believe, it's completely true. The vast majority of the game is just delivering packages. At first, this can only be done on foot, and it's at this point when tools like ladders and climbing ropes are introduced to help you navigate the environment. I'm not against this idea at all. I think it can be really cool to use the tools at your disposal to help yourself get past some tougher obstacles. But there are several reasons why this doesn't work here. For starters, a lot of this is just walking. There's hardly any platforming or mountain climbing, and in reality, you barely need your tools at all. Most of the time, you're just walking. And I need to put an emphasis on walking because you can sprint, but this greatly depletes your maximum stamina. It's easily restored with an item, but that's not the impression that you'll get at first. It also makes you want to avoid rivers since they take a long time to walk across and they also deplete your stamina at a rapid pace. So yeah, have fun walking. Eventually, vehicles are introduced, but it's done so in the most unsatisfying way, as the upcoming area is riddled with small rocks that make it such a pain to get through. And then, that's the end of the first map of the game. Once you reach the second map, you start off without vehicles again. I swear that I hear Kojima laughing all the way from Japan. Once vehicles become the set standard, revisiting older areas becomes so much easier. However, newer areas are designed to be as restrictive as possible on purpose. The Snowy Mountain, one of the last areas of the game, is a special kind of hell. Sure, you can walk all this and have it take twice as long, that is if you don't run out of stamina, or you can drive up the mountain on a bike and look like a complete idiot doing so. The Bridges truck is insanely busted for basically having a black hole for storage. You can pack the whole world twice over in this thing and do multiple deliveries without having to go back and restock. So anytime that you're not allowed to use vehicles, like when you need to transport the overly fragile antimatter bomb, is just the worst. I can't believe they have you deliver this thing twice. Of course, the entire game isn't just delivering packages. Sometimes you'll need to deal with renegades who want to steal your package for themselves. Combat involves some ineffective punches, however you can also beat people over the head with their suitcases. This destroys the supplies within, so you'll need to decide if it's worth the sacrifice. Later on, a bola gun is introduced, which has a slow rate of fire but great range and will incapacitate targets in one shot. This just about trivializes the game's combat, at least until more traditional firearms are introduced about halfway through the game. At this point, I basically gave up on the game having actual guns at all, and now there are suddenly assault rifles everywhere. Even so, you'll need to use the non-lethal versions for human targets for reasons that I don't want to bother getting into.
Sam, looks like you've got a body on your hands. Doesn't matter how it happened, you can't ignore it. And if you're directly responsible, all the more reason to clean it up. Any corpse left alone will eventually go techno and pop a BT. Gotta dispose of it before that happens.
A big problem is that the shooting in this game is pretty poor. And while that's fine when it's not the focus, there are these Warzone segments that turn the game into a generic third-person shooter. The goal here is to gun down Mads Mikkelsen and his entourage of spooky skeleton soldiers, and they hit you harder than anything else in this game. At least that's how I found it for the hard difficulty. So you have to take it real slow and hide behind cover when you get the chance. And let me tell you, if there's one thing I love about cover-based shooting games, it's having half the screen obscured by the character model and his gigantic backpack. Yeah, sure, maybe I can go into the menu or use the item selection wheel to slowly drop off some of this stuff and make it easier to maneuver, but I feel like that should not be an issue here. Also, since the game is designed around being some kind of a hiking simulator, the same controls for aiming and shooting are also used for maintaining your balance. It's a little awkward to get used to, and since you use weapons so rarely in this game, it's always a struggle to get reacclimated. Finally, there are the ghosts. At least you can run past most things, but the ghosts will stop you dead in your tracks. You'll need to carefully sneak past them, which is easier said than done because they're invisible, and you're only given a vague understanding of the general direction and distance that they're in. If you do end up bumping into one, then you're forced out of your vehicle, all of your cargo takes damage, and you either have to walk away and then come back when the ghosts leave to pick up your stuff, or get yourself dragged into a mini-boss battle with an animalistic ink monster. These things can only be defeated with blood-powered weapons, which you don't get for a little while, so this isn't even an option at first. Once you do have access to hematic grenades, then it becomes a game of stunning them with a single explosion and scrambling to find a piece of solid ground to stand on. Get yourself a nice rock to sit on and the battle becomes a total joke as you repeatedly chuck grenades from a safe distance. The actual boss fights, which are just larger versions of the same monsters, are a little more fun since they require you to run around and make more use of the environment. However, the game was just not made for this stuff. Jumping and climbing is extremely sluggish and feels really bad, especially when you're under pressure in an action situation. And I'm sure that because of this, the monsters are extremely non-aggressive. They kind of just sit there half the time, waiting for you to toss them a grenade. Then you get the guns with the blood bullets, and these things really don't stand a chance anymore. Their attacks are so slow, and dodging them is not an issue at all. Which is why the last bit of the game has you fighting multiples of them, with a rocket launcher. I don't know what to tell you, this is stupid as hell. It's a similar issue I had with The Evil Within. These games start off so low-key, and in the end they balloon into something ridiculous. As a consequence, it pretty much loses its identity. Now, I'm not trying to say that Death Stranding is inherently a terrible concept. There is a lot here that is really fascinating. For example, those massive explosions that the ghosts cause can actually occur in-game, which is pretty crazy to me. I didn't care to find out how this would affect the game, so I reloaded a previous save and avoided that from happening again. But it definitely took me by surprise. Also, and more importantly, there's the social strand system that Kojima loves to make a big deal about, which is indeed similar to Demon's Souls and Dark Souls' asynchronous multiplayer. However, Death Stranding does take it a step further. Instead of only leaving behind messages, players can also build whole structures that are then automatically shared online, as well as request supplies from other players to repair and upgrade said structures. The best structure of all, by far, is the paved road, which allows you to soar above and beyond all the nonsense that you would normally have to drive through. And zip lines can also be insanely powerful. However, this also creates a unique predicament. As an experience, it's very nice to see the land ahead of me populated and the path made easier by those who came before, as well as the knowledge that any structures I build can be useful for the players who are coming up next. Even little things like the dynamic footpaths are really cool. However, then there's the other side of the coin, where it feels like I'm basically cheating throughout the entire game. It's already a huge pain to get through as is, so I can only imagine how borderline unplayable it might be without this stuff, especially when you need to backtrack so often. It takes forever to walk everywhere, and half the game is a struggle to force a vehicle through. But then you can just zip zap zoop right up the mountain, see ya gameplay! It's also the kind of feature that requires an active online community to utilize. But when the online servers for Demon's Souls finally went down, it didn't ruin the game. It's still perfectly enjoyable as is. But with Death Stranding, playing this thing blind and offline must be an absolute nightmare, especially if you're gonna consider doing the optional stuff. The biggest problem with Death Stranding is that Kojima tried to do too much. While the Metal Gear games were able to combine stealth, combat, and exploration in ways that complemented each other, with Death Stranding, all of the gameplay mechanics are at odds with one another. Even though making deliveries is the focus, you need to turn it into a sort of stealth game when the ghosts are nearby. You need to do generic and lame third-person combat when that's requested, and God forbid you get your truck stuck somewhere. You're gonna have to reload a previous save to do it all over again, which is likely why the game keeps so many autosaves available. It's so easy for something stupid to accidentally happen and ruin your game. Death Stranding should have kept a strong focus on making deliveries, revamped the map and game balance to make tools a higher priority, and just get rid of the combat entirely. Definitely no ghost. I swear, they don't add anything to the game. You just stand there and shoot them with a BT handgun and oh, it's so difficult. But maybe keep the human enemies and there can be parts where you have to outrun them. Just try to scale it back and maybe there could have been a game that is far more interesting and can appeal to a niche audience. I'm not against the concept of a fantasy version of Euro Truck Simulator, but this tried to do so much at once and it ended up accomplishing nothing. Thanks for watching my review on Death Stranding. And hey, guess what? It's also coming out for PC. Don't buy it. Please don't buy it. It's so bad. This is such an awful game.